He dropped $75,000 on a decaying farmhouse everyone claimed was haunted, a forgotten piece of land in the Nevada desert that hadn't seen a soul in over 30 years. And when he finally smashed through the bricked-up wall in the cellar, what he discovered wasn't just cobwebs and old junk, but a hidden fortune of $150 million in gold that would turn his world upside down. Before you dive into the rest of this story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The desert wind howled through Redstone, Nevada. A town so tiny it barely showed up on GPS. Population 3,217. One main road, 2 convenience stores, 3 churches, and a whole bunch of folks with nothing better to do than gossip about each other. Marcus Webb had figured that out pretty quick. He sat in his worn-out Ford Ranger outside the county auction house, fingers wrapped around the steering wheel like it might calm the storm brewing in his gut. The cloth seats were torn from too many scorching summers under the Nevada sun. The AC had quit 2 years back, but the truck still fired up, and that was more than he could say for most areas of his life lately. Through the dusty windshield, he watched people drift into the squat brick building. Old-timers in fishing caps, investors in pressed slacks, house flippers with notepads and phones out. They all looked comfortable being there, like they had cash to burn and hours to kill. Marcus had neither. He was 32 years old, raising an 8-year-old daughter named Lily on his own. Juggling 3 jobs that barely covered rent. Early mornings at the truck stop diner off Highway 50. Midday hours cleaning rental properties for the leasing office in town. Late shifts doing basic accounting for mom-and-pop shops too broke to hire real CPAs. He got maybe 4 hours of sleep each night and survived on coffee that tasted like motor oil and pure stubborn pride. But 6 months back, something had changed. Lily had come home from school with an assignment about outer space. And Marcus had seen his daughter's face glow when she talked about the planets. That glow, that raw, honest excitement had reminded Marcus of something he'd nearly lost. That life could mean more than just getting by. That hopes didn't have to fade just because you were exhausted. So Marcus had started stashing money. Every spare dollar, every tip left on sticky diner tables, every $20 he could tuck away from his cleaning gigs. He'd opened a hidden account at the local bank and labeled it his breakthrough fund. Lily didn't know about it. Nobody did because Marcus had learned years ago that the second you tell folks you're trying to escape the grind, they start making bets on how fast you'll slide back down. He'd been scanning the auction postings for months, searching for something, anything that might offer him a shot at building something solid. A property he could renovate and lease out, a small commercial space he could rent. Just one grip on the ladder everyone else seemed to scale so naturally. Then 3 weeks ago, he'd spotted the listing. Farmhouse, Redstone Ridge, 15,000 square feet, built 1976, vacant since 1993. Opening bid $75,000. The location alone had caught his attention. Redstone Ridge, the historic area where famous people used to hide away back when the town was actually recognized for something besides sand and broken promises. Most of those places had been demolished or left to rot decades ago when the rich relocated to Lake Tahoe and Beverly Hills, but a handful still remained, crumbling reminders of a time when this desert town had significance. Marcus had cruised past the property twice, both times during daylight hours, both times with the doors locked and Lily safely at school. The farmhouse stood at the end of a long gravel road surrounded by dead sagebrush and rusted wire fence covered in spray paint. The gate sagged open on busted hinges. The driveway was fractured and choked with dry weeds. But the structure itself, even falling apart, was stunning. Ranch-style architecture, weathered wood siding, tall windows, a tin roof that somehow hadn't completely collapsed. It stretched across the land like a sleeping beast, 3 stories high with additions jutting north and south, porches, open yards, a bone-dry well in the front circle. It was enormous. It was abandoned. It was probably a black hole that would devour his savings and leave nothing but disappointment. But it was also $75,000 for a structure that had likely been worth millions back in the day. Marcus checked his phone. 2 minutes until the auction kicked off. He pulled in a deep breath, grabbed his wallet, and climbed out into the September inferno. The sun slammed into him like a wall. 108 degrees typical for this season. Inside the auction house reeked of stale carpet and broken dreams. Metal folding chairs lined up in rows facing a small stage. Maybe 40 people had gathered. Marcus found a spot in the back and tried to blend into the shadows. The auctioneer, a leathery man named Doug something or other who'd been running these sales for 30 years, walked up to the microphone and launched into his routine. First lot was a commercial space downtown, a former auto shop that went for $90,000 to a guy in a Stetson who looked like he already owned half the county. Then came a residential plot. Then a seized dirt bike. Then a storage container stuffed with somebody's entire existence crammed into moving boxes. Marcus's knee bounced anxiously. He'd only attended one auction before, years back when his uncle passed and the county sold off his garage to settle his bills. He'd watched strangers pour through his tools, his unfinished projects, the things he'd cherished. He'd been 19 and flat broke and powerless to rescue any of it. That wound still stung. Finally, Doug cleared his throat and threw up a photo on the projector screen. The farmhouse, even in the harsh glare of the digital shot, it looked like something from an old Western film. "All right, folks. Now we've got something interesting," Doug announced. 15,000 square feet on 4.2 acres in Redstone Ridge. Built 1976. Original owner was Thomas Brennan, the music mogul. Sold in 1989 to an unnamed buyer. Property's been sitting empty since '93. Now, I gotta level with y'all. This one's a beast. Needs plenty of work. Mountains of work. But the foundation's decent and the location's got legacy. Someone in the third row laughed. Yeah. Legacy of being cursed. A wave of chuckles rolled through the room. Doug smirked. Well, I can't speak to the supernatural angle, but I can tell you the opening bid is $75,000. Do I hear 75? Dead silence. Marcus's pulse hammered. He could feel moisture gathering under his collar. The figure he'd saved sat in his account like a challenge. $73,812. Everything he owned, everything he'd clawed together over 6 months of grinding and gambling. $75,000, Doug called again. Come on now. This is robbery for the square footage alone. More silence. Folks fidgeted in their seats. Someone muttered to the person beside them. Marcus's hand trembled. Don't be an idiot, a voice in his skull warned. You don't know squat about renovating houses. You can barely fix a dripping pipe. This is crazy. But another voice, quieter yet fiercer, pushed back. When are you ever gonna get a shot like this again? His hand shot up. Doug's eyes locked on him instantly. 75,000 to the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 80? The room swiveled to stare at him. Marcus felt every gaze like a brand. He recognized some of the faces. The woman from the lumber yard. The guy who ran the tattoo parlor. Patricia from the community center where Lily sometimes went for after-school programs. Nobody moved. 80,000. Doug pressed again, sweeping the room. This is a 15,000 square foot farmhouse, folks. Even as a demo job, the acreage alone is worth double this. A guy in the front row started to lift his hand, then dropped it, shaking his head. Going once, Doug announced. Going twice. His gavel hung in the air. Marcus couldn't breathe. The gavel slammed down. Sold to bidder 212 for $75,000. The crack echoed through the space like a rifle shot. Marcus sat paralyzed, unable to comprehend what had just gone down. He'd won. He'd actually won. But as folks started standing and collecting their belongings, he caught the murmurs. Poor guy. Doesn't he know about that place? Somebody should have told him. An older woman named Eleanor, who worked at the pharmacy, paused by Marcus's chair on her way out. She had warm eyes, but a tongue that never learned when to stay quiet. Sweetheart, Eleanor said, her tone hushed and sympathetic. "You know what went down there, don't you?" Marcus shook his head, still reeling. Eleanor looked around, then bent closer. That farmhouse belonged to Gerald Mitchell. The Gerald Mitchell, the blues legend. He scooped it up back in '89, right before he went all spiritual and stepped away from touring. Used to escape out here for solitude, for meditation or whatever. Then in '93, he just vanished. Never returned. Wouldn't even mention the property. Marcus blinked. "Gerald Mitchell owned my farmhouse." "Owned," Eleanor emphasized. Past tense. "And there's a damn good reason he ditched it. Folks say things went down there. Weird things. Lights flickering in the windows when nobody's around. Noises echoing from inside. The last real estate agent who tried to show it bailed after one visit. Said the place felt evil." Marcus forced a grin. "I don't really buy into hauntings, Eleanor." The older woman's face melted into something resembling sympathy. "Well, honey, you're about to discover the truth one way or another." She squeezed Marcus's shoulder and shuffled away. By the time Marcus waded through the contracts, inked the papers, and wired the money, it was almost noon. He stepped out of the auction house as the legal owner of a 15,000-square-foot farmhouse he couldn't afford to furnish, restore, or probably even protect with insurance. His phone buzzed as he reached his truck. "Lily's school." "Mr. Webb, this is Vice Principal Chen." "Lily's okay, but we need you to come get her. She's feeling sick." Marcus shut his eyes and rested his forehead against the baking metal of his truck. "Naturally. Of course. Today was the day Lily got sick." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, he said. He collected Lily from the health room. His daughter looked tiny and washed out, huddled on the plastic cot with a bucket nearby just in case. Marcus's chest tightened. Lily had her mother's bright eyes and her father's determined jaw. She was the greatest thing Marcus had ever accomplished in his life, and moments like this reminded him how delicate everything was. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said gently, smoothing hair from Lily's forehead. "Rough morning?" Lily nodded weakly. "My tummy hurts. Let's get you home." They drove in silence, Lily nodding off in the passenger seat. Marcus's brain spun through numbers he couldn't complete. The farmhouse needed a new roof, likely new pipes, definitely rewiring. The land taxes alone would exceed his current rent payment. What had he done? What had he been thinking? But when he glanced over at Lily, asleep with her mouth barely open and her hand tucked beneath her cheek, Marcus remembered. He'd been thinking about building his daughter a future, a real home, something solid and lasting instead of the string of cramped apartments they'd bounced through over the years. He'd been thinking it was time to stop just getting by and start actually living. That evening, after Lily crashed on the couch with cartoons humming quietly in the background, Marcus made a decision. He needed to see the farmhouse again. Not from the road, not from behind the safety of his locked truck. He needed to walk through it room by room and figure out if he'd just pulled off the biggest blunder of his life or the boldest move he'd ever made. He called his neighbor Mrs. Ramirez, an older woman who frequently watched Lily when Marcus's work shifts collided. Mrs. Ramirez showed up within minutes, carrying homemade stew and calm encouragement. "You go handle what you need to handle," Mrs. Ramirez said. "Lily and I will be perfectly fine." Marcus grabbed a flashlight, his phone, and the keys he'd received at the auction house. The sun was dipping as he drove toward Redstone Ridge, splashing the desert in waves of crimson and violet. The temperature had cooled to a more tolerable 98 degrees. The farmhouse looked transformed in the fading light, less like a wreck and more like a dormant castle, waiting to stir. Marcus parked in the front circle and sat for a beat, summoning his nerve. The windows were black. The front door, heavy and timber, stood beneath an arched entrance. He climbed out of the truck. The desert twilight was still, except for the hiss of wind through dead brush. He walked up to the front door and tested the key. It turned cleanly, which caught him off guard. The door groaned open, the sound bouncing through the hollow interior. Marcus stepped inside. The entrance hall was massive. A chandelier dangled from the vaulted ceiling, caked in grime and spiderwebs. The floor was hardwood planks, splintered in spots, but still striking. A wide staircase swept upward to the second floor. Doorways split off in every direction. He hit the light switch. Nothing. Obviously. The power had been dead for 3 decades. Marcus clicked on his flashlight and started to explore. The beam sliced through darkness and uncovered fragments of a life abandoned. Furniture still filled some rooms, draped with white cloths that had faded to dingy grey. A dining room table that could hold 20 people. A parlor with a stone fireplace tall enough to walk into. A kitchen with appliances from the 1980s. But it was the finer points that grabbed his attention. The artistry, hand-carved trim, stained glass panels, custom-built shelving, curved doorways. This wasn't just a building. It was a masterpiece. He climbed the stairs slowly, testing each plank. The second floor contained bedrooms, each one huge by today's standards, massive closets, private bathrooms, decks facing the desert. One room at the end of the corridor had obviously been a recording studio. A keyboard rested against the back wall, keys faded but still whole. Sheet music sat propped on the stand. Marcus moved closer and read the title, Midnight Blues by Gerald Mitchell. Marcus moved closer and read the title, Midnight Blues by Gerald Mitchell. A shiver crawled up his back despite the warmth. He was standing inside Gerald Mitchell's farmhouse. The blues icon had walked these floorboards, played this keyboard, gazed out these windows. Marcus kept moving. The third floor was tighter, mostly storage space and what appeared to be a prayer room with cushions and candles, long ago melted into pools of wax. It was when he looped back to the first floor and started checking the northern wing that he spotted something strange. The corridor didn't add up. He measured it with his steps. From the outside, the wing stretched at least 50 feet. But the rooms he'd discovered only covered maybe 30 feet of distance. 20 feet were unaccounted for. He went back outside and circled the perimeter of the farmhouse, counting windows, then back inside, counting rooms. The numbers didn't work. There was area missing. Marcus stood in the corridor of the northern wing, examining the walls. One section lined with built-in cabinets looked oddly bulky. He dragged his hands across the wood, pushing lightly, hunting for gaps or latches. Nothing. He backed away, annoyed. Maybe he was mistaken. Maybe the layout was just bizarre. Old structures could be like that sometimes. But the nagging sensation wouldn't quit. Something was hidden. He spent another hour probing, growing more certain with each tick of the clock that there was concealed area in this farmhouse. Finally, wiped out and covered in dust, he chose to wrap it up for the night. He could return tomorrow with real equipment and maybe somebody who actually understood about building design. As he secured the front door behind him, his phone chimed with a text from Mrs. Ramirez. "Lily's out cold. No need to hurry. Take your time." Marcus sat in his truck for a beat, gazing up at the farmhouse. Moonlight bathed it in silver, making it look ghostly and almost unreal. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped. He didn't buy into curses. He didn't buy into hauntings, but he did believe in mysteries. And this farmhouse was concealing something. He just had to discover it. The next morning, Marcus woke with a strategy and a pounding skull. Lily was feeling better, thankfully, and Marcus got her to school before heading to his shift at the truck stop diner. The breakfast crowd was chaos. Truckers demanding pancakes and coffee. Travelers asking for directions to Carson City. Regular faces who'd caught wind of his auction win and wanted to share unwanted opinions. "You've lost your mind," said Raymond, a roofer who showed up every Tuesday. "That place has been decaying for 30 years. Foundations probably toast. Plumbing's for sure destroyed," added Karen, a property agent who tracked everyone's drama. "And I heard there's toxic mold in the structure." Marcus smiled through it all, topping off mugs and holding his peace. Let them gossip. Let them question. He was accustomed to it. During his break, he sat in his truck and worked the phone. First an electrician who said he could swing by next week to check the wiring mess, then a general contractor who chuckled when he heard the address and said, "Best of luck with that one, pal." He was about to dial a foundation specialist when his phone rang. Unknown caller. "Hello, is this Marcus Webb?" The voice was male, businesslike, slightly rushed. "Yeah. Who's asking?" "My name is Vincent. I'm a music historian and collector. I focus on blues-era relics and memorabilia. I heard through channels that you acquired the former Mitchell estate in Redstone." Marcus's grip tightened on his phone. "Word spreads quick. Small towns love to talk," Vincent said. "Listen, I know this is bold, but I've been attempting to access that property for years. Gerald Mitchell was one of the most influential musicians of his generation, and that farmhouse represents a critical chapter of his journey. If there are any pieces remaining, photographs, recordings, personal belongings, they could be culturally priceless. I'd be willing to compensate for access, or we could arrange some kind of deal." "I just acquired it yesterday," Marcus said carefully. "I haven't even catalogued what's inside." Of course. I get it. But if you discover anything at all connected to Mitchell, please reach out. I'm ready to offer reasonable compensation, and I can link you with the appropriate archives and institutions. This isn't just about profit. It's about protecting history." Marcus jotted down his number, agreed to call if he found anything, and disconnected, feeling uneasy. He'd purchased the farmhouse thinking about rental revenue and land equity. It hadn't crossed his mind that he might be sitting on genuine historical treasures. That evening, he drove back to the farmhouse with Lily riding shotgun. His daughter's eyes ballooned when she glimpsed the scale of the structure. "We're living here now?" Lily gasped. "Not yet," Marcus said. "We have to restore it first." "But yeah, sweetheart. This is ours." They wandered together, Lily marveling at every space while Marcus tapped notes on his phone. Cracked planks, water damage on ceilings, windows sealed shut. The inventory expanded with each passing moment. But Lily's excitement was contagious. She sprinted through the hollow rooms, her laughter bouncing off towering ceilings. "This can be my bedroom, and this can be your bedroom, and this can be the reading room." "You want a reading room?" Marcus asked, grinning. "Every house should have a reading room," Lily said earnestly. "That's what Mrs. Jenkins says." They wound up in the kitchen as the sun disappeared. Marcus lifted Lily onto the old countertop while he inspected the ancient oven. 1980s era. Probably useless. Probably a hazard. "Dad," Lily said softly. "Yeah, sweetheart. Are we gonna be all right?" Marcus turned to face his daughter. Lily's face was deliberately blank, the way it looked when she was trying to act tough about something that worried her. "Yeah," Marcus said with conviction. "We're gonna be more than all right. I promise." He believed it. He had to believe it because the alternative, that he'd just blown every dollar they owned on a crumbling farmhouse with hidden spaces and a possible hex, was too horrifying to accept. After dropping Lily back at Mrs. Ramirez's for the evening, Marcus headed back to the northern wing. He'd brought equipment this time, a measuring tape, a level, a stud sensor he'd borrowed from Raymond at the diner, and a pry bar just in case. He measured the corridor again, then walked outside and measured the outer wall. 23 feet of interior area were missing. An entire space, maybe two, buried behind that cabinet wall. Marcus ran the stud sensor across the wood paneling. Solid. 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 Then abruptly hollow. A wide hollow zone right in the middle of the cabinet. His pulse kicked up. He studied the cabinets more closely. Most were fastened permanently, but one segment felt less secure. He pulled gently. Nothing budged. He tried pressing instead. Still nothing. Then he saw it, a narrow opening between two items that wouldn't move. They were decoys, carved wood painted to resemble stored objects. and in that opening was a tiny lock. Marcus's breath hitched. He didn't have a key. Obviously, he didn't. This place had been locked up for 30 years. Any keys were long vanished. He weighed his choices. He could hire a locksmith. He could attempt to pick it, or he could grab the pry bar and break his way through. The pry bar won. He jammed it into the space beside the fake items and yanked. The wood creaked but stayed put. He shifted his position and hauled again. This time something gave, a snap, a release. The entire cabinet section pivoted inward like a passage. Marcus lurched backward, almost losing his grip on the pry bar. His flashlight beam pierced the blackness beyond, exposing a stairwell leading down into the cellar, into a zone that shouldn't be there, into a secret that had been hiding in the shadows for 3 decades. Marcus stood paralyzed at the entrance, his flashlight beam slicing through decades of gloom. The air that rose from the hidden stairwell was cool and arid, carrying the subtle smell of cedar and something else he couldn't quite name. Not rot, not mildew, something almost fragrant, like vintage cologne locked in a sealed container. His hands shook as he tightened his grip on the flashlight. Every fiber warned him to call someone, to hold off, to not venture down there solo. But curiosity blazed stronger than fear. He'd spent his entire existence playing it cautious, following the safe path, choosing survival over gambles. And where had it landed him? 3 jobs, a drained bank account, and a tomorrow that mirrored his yesterday. Not this time. Marcus descended the stairs gradually, checking each plank before committing his weight. The wooden steps were sound, remarkably well maintained. Whoever constructed this hidden zone had built it properly. The stairwell wound down roughly 15 feet before expanding into a chamber. When his flashlight swept across the space, Marcus's breath seized in his chest. It was a vault, a climate-regulated, meticulously engineered vault that spanned the full length of the missing 23 feet. The walls were lined with custom shelving, glass-fronted cases, and storage containers that resembled museum-quality fixtures. And every single inch was packed with riches. Gold bars stacked in precise rows, their surfaces gleaming even under the dusty beam of his flashlight. Marcus moved closer, his heart hammering. Rows upon rows of gold bars, each one stamped with markings and serial codes. He picked one up, heavy, solid, unmistakably real. He counted quickly, dozens of them, maybe 50 or more, each one marked with authentication stamps and weight certificates. The vault contained an estimated $150 million in gold. But the gold bars were just the start. Marcus moved through the vault slowly, taking inventory with a brain that couldn't fully absorb it all. Musical instruments were displayed in protective cases, vintage guitars that had been played on legendary recordings. A Martin D-28 from the 1950s. A Hammond B3 organ with brass plates that gleamed under his light. Each instrument was flawless, shielded from humidity and temperature swings, preserved as if Gerald Mitchell might step in at any second and need them for his next session. There were photographs, hundreds of them, some mounted on the walls, others carefully archived in preservation boxes. Gerald with B.B. King. Gerald with Muddy Waters in the recording booth. Gerald accepting his Lifetime Achievement Award in 1985. Intimate shots of jam sessions, tour bus moments, family reunions, a visual chronicle of a life lived between stages and quiet moments. Marcus discovered master reels stacked in climate-controlled storage, original recordings from historic sessions, unreleased material, alternate takes of songs that had shaped a generation. Each reel was marked in precise handwriting with dates and production notes. Some carried signatures from the session players and engineers who'd crafted brilliance in those studios. There were handwritten lyrics, pages upon pages of them, some on motel letterhead, others on spiral notebooks. Marcus recognized Crossroads at Midnight in its earliest draft, the verses scratched out and revised, the creative journey visible in faded ink and urgent scribbles. Witnessing the raw genesis behind a song he'd heard countless times made his throat tighten with something resembling awe. Personal belongings occupied other sections. Recognition beyond the standard awards, Blues Music Association honors, Hall of Fame plaques, ceremonial keys to cities, declarations from officials and community leaders, letters from admirers, some celebrated, most ordinary. A worn Bible with annotations throughout, diaries with entries reaching back to the 1960s. And in the deepest corner of the vault, secured behind a locked glass cabinet, rested the ultimate prize: original contracts, publishing ownership, master recordings that Gerald had battled to maintain control over. Documents that represented not merely artistic heritage, but genuine ownership of some of the most valuable intellectual property in music history. Marcus lowered himself onto a small stool against the wall, stunned. He'd anticipated finding maybe some abandoned furniture, possibly a few overlooked keepsakes. Instead, he was sitting in the center of a collection that deserved a spot in the National Museum. This wasn't just collectibles. This was legacy. This was wealth. This was worth an incomprehensible fortune. His phone vibrated in his pocket, startling him. A text from Mrs. Ramirez. "Lily's wondering when you'll be back." "All good." Marcus checked the clock. He'd been down here for over an hour. It had seemed like 10 minutes. He tapped back quickly. Heading out, 20 minutes. But before he departed, he took photos. Hundreds of them, panoramic shots of the entire vault, detailed images of specific pieces, the gold bars, the instruments, the master reels, everything. His hands trembled as he documented what he'd uncovered, realizing that his existence had just shifted in ways he couldn't begin to grasp. When he finally climbed back up the stairs and sealed the hidden entrance, the cabinet sliding back into position with a quiet click, Marcus felt like he was exiting a fantasy and re-entering the real world. Except the real world was the fantasy now, and the impossible had become his reality. He drove home in a fog, his thoughts spinning through opportunities and complications in equal parts. What was the procedure for discovering something like this? Who did you contact? The estate, an attorney, law enforcement? And more crucially, was it even his? He'd purchased the farmhouse and everything inside it. But did that cover hidden vaults stuffed with priceless relics? That night, after Lily drifted off, Marcus sat at his laptop and started digging. He began with Gerald Mitchell's connection to the farmhouse. Most of what Eleanor had mentioned proved accurate. Gerald had acquired the property in 1989 during a time when he'd withdrawn from touring after his spiritual awakening. He'd used the Redstone farmhouse as a sanctuary, a place to meditate and decompress away from the chaos of celebrity. But in 1993, he'd vanished suddenly. The farmhouse had been looked after by a management service for a couple years, then neglected when the payments stopped coming. Eventually, it had slipped into foreclosure and been tangled in court battles for years before ultimately landing at auction. What Marcus couldn't locate was any reference to the vault, no interviews where Gerald mentioned it, no estate records that catalogued its contents. It was as if the hidden chamber had been erased from all public documentation. He searched for details about Gerald Mitchell's estate. The musician had died in 2009 from complications related to diabetes. His estate had been split among his relatives, overseen by accountants and legal teams. But Marcus found no indication that anyone was aware of the Redstone vault. It was conceivable, he understood, that Gerald had constructed this space as his personal refuge, a place to protect the things that meant most to him, tucked away from managers and record companies and the relentless pressure of an industry that had frequently demanded more than it rewarded. Maybe he'd intended to collect everything eventually. Maybe he'd simply run out of years. Marcus's research pulled him down another path. The worth of music artifacts had skyrocketed in recent decades. Johnny Cash's guitar had sold for $350,000. Jimi Hendrix's amplifier for $500,000. Chuck Berry's Cadillac for over $1 million. And those were individual pieces from artists who, while iconic, hadn't necessarily kept ownership of their original recordings. What Marcus had discovered was different. This was an entire career's collection of relics, plus the gold itself. The metal alone could be worth $150 million at current market rates. The unreleased recordings could command extraordinary sums from enthusiasts and archives. The instruments, the accolades, the personal belongings, each item was a piece of cultural heritage. He stayed awake until 3 o'clock in the morning compiling lists and documenting details. By the time fatigue finally drove him to collapse, one reality was obvious. He needed guidance. Expert guidance from people who understood this territory far better than he did. The next morning, Marcus called Vincent, the music historian who'd reached out to him. He picked up on the second ring, his tone excited. "Mr. Webb, I was hoping I'd hear from you. I discovered something," Marcus said cautiously. "In the farmhouse. I need somebody who knows what they're examining to explain what I'm dealing with." There was a beat of silence. "What kind of something?" "The kind that has to be witnessed to be understood." "Can you get to Redstone?" "I can be there tomorrow," Vincent said instantly. "Early morning." Marcus gave him the address and disconnected, his gut twisting with nervousness. He was about to expose a secret that had been buried for over 30 years. Once that threshold was crossed, there would be no reversing it. Vincent showed up at 8 the next morning in a sedan, carrying a leather bag and an attitude of barely suppressed anticipation. He was in his mid-50s with salt and pepper hair and metal-framed glasses that lent him an academic vibe. He introduced himself formally, gripping Marcus's hand with both of his. "Thank you for trusting me with this," he said. "I assure you, whatever you discovered, I'll help you navigate it correctly." Marcus guided him through the farmhouse to the northern wing. He'd brought superior lighting this time, battery-operated work lamps he'd grabbed at the hardware depot. When he opened the hidden entrance and exposed the stairwell, Vincent actually gasped. "Oh my God," he breathed. "He built a vault." "You knew about this?" Marcus asked sharply. No, I had zero knowledge, but it tracks." Gerald was intensely protective of his legacy, especially after some rough dealings with labels in the 80s. He battled fiercely to reclaim control of his recordings. If he constructed a secret archive, he stopped mid-sentence, staring down the stairs. "May I?" Marcus motioned for him to proceed. He followed behind, observing Vincent's reaction as the vault revealed itself. Vincent froze at the base of the stairs, his jaw dropping. "Sweet, merciful heaven," he whispered. For the next 3 hours, Vincent navigated through the vault like a pilgrim in a shrine. He inspected every piece with profound care, recording observations on a tablet, capturing images with a professional camera, periodically pausing to simply absorb something with moisture in his eyes. Marcus observed him, attempting to read whether his response validated his instincts about the worth of what he'd uncovered. Finally, he couldn't hold back any longer. "So," he asked, "what am I dealing with here?" Vincent pivoted toward him, and his face looked almost terrified. "Mr. Webb, do you comprehend what this is?" "A collection?" "This is the holy grail of blues history," Vincent said, his voice trembling. "These master reels alone, if they're what I believe they are, they're irreplaceable. Some of these sessions were assumed to be destroyed forever. And the gold bars," he gestured broadly. "That's $150 million in pure gold. Minimum." Marcus's knees felt unstable. "How much total are we discussing?" Vincent set down his camera deliberately. "I can't provide an exact valuation without professional assessment, but conservatively, the gold, the recordings, the publishing rights if they're included in these contracts," he motioned to the secured cabinet. "We need to authenticate those documents. But if they're genuine, you're holding ownership interest in some of the most lucrative compositions in music history." He paused, selecting his words deliberately. "I would estimate somewhere between $150 and $180 million total." The figure struck Marcus like a punch. He actually stumbled, bracing himself against the wall. "That's impossible." "It's not only possible, it's probable," Vincent said. "Mr. Webb, you're standing inside the most significant blues discovery in modern times. This reshapes everything we assumed about Gerald Mitchell's planning. This is archive-grade material. This is," he halted, "overcome. This is phenomenal." Marcus slid down the wall until he was seated on the concrete, his thoughts empty with disbelief. $150 million in gold alone. He'd been stressing about covering a new roof. He'd been crunching numbers on whether he could manage the land taxes. And the entire time, he'd been sitting on a treasure that would transform not just his existence, but Lily's future and potentially the futures of grandchildren he hadn't even considered yet. "What do I do?" he asked softly. Vincent lowered himself across from him. "First, we fortify this area properly. Superior locks, perhaps a security grid. Then we initiate the verification process. I can link you with the appropriate specialists, appraisers, estate attorneys, music industry consultants. We'll need to notify Gerald's estate representatives. Obviously, there will be legal challenges about ownership and provenance." But Mr. Webb, he grinned. "You just hit the jackpot. The cosmic, universal, impossible jackpot. What happens next will turn Marcus's quiet discovery into a dangerous game of power and greed, revealing threats he never saw coming and testing everything he thought he knew about luck and survival. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more." Over the following week, Marcus's reality morphed into something barely recognizable. Vincent connected him with an attorney who specialized in entertainment contracts. The attorney, a razor-sharp woman named Patricia based in Reno, drove out to Redstone personally to examine the vault. Her response echoed Vincent's, minus the emotion, but with substantially more alarm about liability and legal jeopardy. "You need protection," Patricia said flatly. "Like immediately. Once news breaks about this, and it will break, you're going to attract every collector, every record company, every treasure seeker in the nation trying to access this cash. Some will be legitimate. Most won't be." Marcus had already begun implementing safeguards. He'd contracted a regional security firm to install cameras and motion detectors around the property. He'd replaced all the locks. He'd relocated Lily and himself into the farmhouse, establishing a basic living area in the southern wing where the water still functioned. It felt wiser to be on location, guarding what he'd uncovered. The verification process commenced. Specialists arrived from New York, Memphis, Chicago. A man who toured as Gerald Mitchell's road manager in the 90s identified multiple pieces and confirmed their authenticity. A recording engineer who'd worked sessions with Gerald validated some of the master reels. Each confirmation added another tier of certainty and another digit to the projected worth. But it was the gold that proved most staggering. Stacked in that vault were bars worth approximately $150 million at current market prices. Gerald had apparently converted much of his wealth into physical gold and stored it here in his secret vault rather than in banks or investment accounts. That metal alone exceeded all initial estimates. The assessments arrived in waves. The instruments, $8 million. The unreleased master reels, $25 million, potentially more if commercially released. The publishing rights documented in the contracts, $22 million. The photographs, personal belongings and memorabilia, $15 million. The gold bars, $150 million. Total estimated value, $220 million. Marcus stared at the final assessment report, unable to absorb the figure. He was worth more than some corporations, more than he could use in a dozen lifetimes, more than felt genuine or possible or deserved. "What do I owe?" he asked Patricia during one of their phone calls. "Legally, the farmhouse and its contents were transferred to you in a valid auction. Unless Gerald's estate can demonstrate the vault was explicitly excluded from the transaction, which seems improbable given that nobody knew it existed, everything inside it belongs to you." "But ethically?" Patricia was silent for a beat. "That's not a legal matter, Marcus. That's something you have to resolve for yourself." Marcus did resolve it. He contacted Gerald Mitchell's estate representatives and disclosed what he discovered. The conversation was strained initially, filled with skepticism and doubt. But as Marcus supplied evidence, photographs, assessment reports, expert verification, the atmosphere shifted to shocked appreciation. An arrangement was negotiated. Marcus would retain ownership of the collection and determine its destiny. In exchange, he would create a foundation in Gerald Mitchell's name, using a percentage of the resources to fund music education and support emerging blues artists. The estate would have consultation rights on how Gerald's heritage was showcased and protected. But Marcus would maintain authority. It was equitable. It was correct. And it ensured that this discovery would impact more lives than just his own. But fairness didn't shield Marcus from the sinister side of his discovery. The first warning arrived by email. Anonymous, untraceable, brief, and blunt. That collection doesn't belong to you. Walk away while you still can. Marcus forwarded it to Patricia, who immediately contacted the FBI. Valuable music artifacts attracted serious criminals, she explained. Criminal organizations had been implicated in heists of rare instruments and recordings before. The warning had to be treated seriously. Then came the proposals. A private buyer from Singapore offered $60 million cash for the entire collection, no questions asked. A venture capitalist wanted to purchase just the gold bars for $140 million. A foreign archive proposed a loan arrangement that would have required transporting the entire vault internationally. Marcus rejected them all. He'd already determined what to do with the collection, and it didn't involve the highest bidder. That's when circumstances intensified. He was exiting the auto parts store one afternoon when a black Escalade stopped beside him in the lot. Two men climbed out, both wearing tailored suits that looked ridiculous in the desert heat. The taller one approached with a grin that never touched his eyes. "Mr. Webb, we'd like to discuss the Mitchell collection with you." Marcus's grip tightened on his truck keys. "I'm not interested in selling." "We understand. But there are parties who believe very firmly that certain items in that collection rightfully belong with them. Items that were promised, items that carry sentimental significance beyond monetary value. Then they can reach out to my attorney," Marcus said, attempting to step around him. The man blocked his path. Not aggressively exactly, but definitely obstructing. "Mr. Webb, you seem like a reasonable man. You've got a daughter, correct? Lily, sweet little girl. 8 years old, attends Redstone Elementary." Ice shot through Marcus's veins. "Are you threatening my child?" "Not at all," the man said smoothly. "We're simply observing that you have considerable stakes. And the individuals we represent, they have means, influence, methods of creating complications for people who don't comply. Wouldn't it be simpler to just sell them what they're after? Name your figure." Marcus's fear converted into blazing fury. He yanked out his phone and began filming. "You just threatened my daughter on video. I'm contacting the police and my attorney and the FBI agent who's already investigating threats against me. Step away from my truck now." The men traded looks. The shorter one shrugged. They climbed back into their Escalade and pulled away, but not before the tall one shouted through the window, "Think it over, Mr. Webb. Some chances don't repeat." Marcus's hands trembled so violently he could barely tap Patricia's number. The attorney picked up instantly, and Marcus spilled everything that had just occurred. Patricia's reaction was immediate and forceful. "I'm arranging upgraded security for you, actual professionals, not just surveillance equipment. And we're filing for protective orders. This is accelerating quicker than I anticipated." "Who are these people?" Marcus asked, his voice cracking. "What do they want?" "Based on your description, likely agents for a private buyer or possibly even a corporation trying to recover recordings they believe they control. The music business has a vicious side, Marcus. When this kind of wealth is at stake, people become ruthless." That night, Marcus held Lily close as they sat on the worn couch in their makeshift quarters in the farmhouse. His daughter was flipping through a book about space exploration, unaware of the threat circling around them. Marcus had already committed to hiring protection. 2 guards would begin tomorrow, working alternating shifts to monitor the property around the clock. He gazed out the window at the desert fading into darkness, questioning whether he'd made a catastrophic error. Maybe he should have backed out when Eleanor warned him about the farmhouse being cursed. Maybe he should have accepted the first substantial offer and taken Lily somewhere distant where they could rebuild without constantly watching their backs. But then he considered the vault, Gerald Mitchell's meticulously protected heritage, preserved in darkness for someone to discover and safeguard it. He thought about the music that had touched countless lives, about the foundation he was organizing, the grants for young musicians, the preservation of culture that mattered. He thought about Lily, asking if they were gonna be all right, and the vow he'd made, more than all right. Marcus pulled his daughter closer and made another vow, this time to himself. He wasn't going to let intimidation prevail. He wasn't going to let powerful figures with unlimited resources and corrupt intention seize what he'd discovered and lock it away for their own gain. He'd spent his entire existence being invisible, being dismissed, being undervalued, the struggling single dad grinding 3 jobs just to stay afloat, the man nobody anticipated anything from. But now he was the protector of something remarkable, and he was going to battle fiercely to defend it. Even if that battle was only starting. The security guard showed up at sunrise. 2 former Army MPs named Diego and Yanel who looked like they could flip Marcus's truck without breaking a sweat. They surveyed the property with a kind of laser-focused alertness that made Marcus feel both more secure and more conscious of just how much peril he might genuinely be facing. "Standard procedure," Diego said, indicating vulnerable sections in the fence perimeter. "We'll fortify these areas. Add floodlights here and here. Deploy additional cameras with infrared capability. Anyone attempts to breach this farmhouse, we'll detect it before they're within 50 yards. Yanel was inspecting the farmhouse's access points. "How many people are aware of the vault?" "Too many," Marcus confessed. "The specialists who verified everything, my attorney, the estate's lawyers, and whoever those guys in the Escalade were representing. Then we proceed assuming someone will attempt something," Yanel said matter-of-factly. "Forced entry, robbery, coercion. Our mission is to ensure none of that reaches you or your daughter." Marcus observed them operate throughout the morning, converting his property into something resembling a compound. It should have eased his mind. Instead, it highlighted just how drastically his existence had shifted in a handful of weeks. He'd gone from stressing about utilities to employing armed protection. The disorientation was almost sickening. Lily registered the changes instantly when Marcus collected her from school that afternoon. His daughter's eyes widened at the sight of Diego positioned near the entrance, and she clutched Marcus's hand firmly. "Dad, why is there a guard? Are we in danger?" Marcus crouched to Lily's eye level, selecting his words deliberately. "No, sweetheart. We're not in danger. But remember how I explained we discovered some really valuable things in the farmhouse? Things that belong to a legendary musician? Well, some folks want those things, and we have to ensure they stay protected. The guards are here to help us with that, like security detail." Lily's anxiety shifted into tentative fascination. "Like in the action movies?" "Kind of like that," Marcus said, grateful that his daughter's 8-year-old imagination could transform risk into excitement. "But you still need to follow their instructions if they tell you something, okay? And stick near the farmhouse after school. No exploring the property alone." Lily nodded seriously, and Marcus felt another stab of remorse. His daughter shouldn't have to consider things like security measures and constant awareness. She should be focused on assignments and recess games and which show to stream after dinner. But this was their current situation now, and Marcus was resolved to ensure it was short-lived. The legal warfare commenced in full force the following week. A record company called Apex Music filed a hefty lawsuit claiming they controlled the masters to several unreleased sessions discovered in the vault. Their position was that Gerald Mitchell had recorded those tracks under agreement with them in 1987 and therefore all material from those sessions belonged to the label regardless of their physical location. Patricia filed a counter-argument that was both legally sharp and personally cutting. The masters had been in Gerald's custody, secured in his private vault, never transferred to Apex Music. The contract had been satisfied with the delivery of the specified album. Any supplementary recordings remained Gerald's assets, and by extension, they now belonged to Marcus as the rightful owner of the property and its contents. "This is going to be a war," Patricia cautioned during a phone conversation. "Apex has massive resources and a reputation for brutal litigation. They're going to attempt to prolong this, accumulate legal expenses, hope you'll compromise just to end it. I'm not compromising, Marcus said resolutely. Excellent, because we can prevail. The law supports us, but it's going to turn nasty before it improves. Patricia wasn't overstating. Within days, 2 additional lawsuits materialized. A former session musician claimed he'd been guaranteed specific instruments that he could now recognize in Marcus's vault. A sound engineer insisted that several master reels had been taken from his facility in 1992 and demanded their instant surrender. Both allegations were questionable, weakly substantiated, and blatantly opportunistic, but they still demanded legal responses, court documents, attorney fees that were mounting quicker than Marcus could calculate. He sat at the kitchen table one evening, surrounded by legal paperwork he barely comprehended, and felt the old recognizable burden of overwhelming circumstances bearing down on his shoulders, the burden he'd shouldered for years, the one he believed he'd finally shed. Lily was asleep upstairs. The security guards were conducting their perimeter checks outside. The farmhouse was silent, except for the drone of the new climate regulation system Patricia had insisted they install to safeguard the vault's contents. And Marcus was alone with the understanding that possessing $220 million in holdings didn't equate to actually having $220 million accessible. He couldn't tap into the collection's worth without liquidating it, and he wasn't prepared to liquidate. The legal conflicts were draining resources faster than he could replenish them. His savings were depleted. He'd had to abandon 2 of his 3 jobs to handle everything connected to the discovery, which meant he was surviving on his truck stop wages and whatever loans he could piece together. In certain respects, he was more financially strapped now than he'd been before acquiring the farmhouse. The paradox was almost amusing. Almost. His phone buzzed. Unknown caller. Marcus wavered, then picked up. It could be another attorney, another consultant, another fragment of this riddle he was attempting to solve. Mr. Webb, the voice was female, mature, with a faint Texas drawl. My name is Dorothy. I was Gerald Mitchell's assistant from 1988 to 1994. Someone mentioned you discovered his vault. Marcus straightened in his chair. Yes, I'm the one who found it. Thank God, Dorothy exhaled. I've been praying for 30 years that someone would. Gerald made me vow never to reveal anything about that chamber. Made me swear on my father's Bible. But he's passed now, and you deserve to understand the truth about why he constructed it. I'm listening, Marcus said softly. Dorothy's account flowed out like a dam breaking. She'd been recruited as Gerald's personal assistant in the late 80s, right when the musician was battling to reclaim ownership of his masters from various record companies. The legal confrontations had been vicious, labels asserting ownership of sessions, producers demanding cuts, agents taking percentages of percentages until Gerald's own compositions barely felt like his anymore. He was drained, Dorothy said. Spiritually, mentally, financially. He'd earned millions of dollars, but the business had consumed most of it. And he recognized that everything he'd built, all that music that had touched so many lives, he didn't even control it. Not truly. So he started pushing back. The struggle had consumed years. Gerald retained the finest attorneys money could secure and pursued his masters recording by recording, agreement by agreement. Some he recovered completely, others he negotiated shared ownership. A handful he had to abandon, the corporations too dominant or the contracts too binding to challenge. But every master he reclaimed, every publishing stake he recovered, he secured in the Redstone Vault. It was his protection, Dorothy explained. His method of preserving what he'd battled so fiercely to possess. He told me once, Dorothy said, her voice heavy with feeling, that the industry had stripped everything from him before. His voice, his music, his autonomy. He wasn't going to allow it to repeat. That vault was his declaration, this is mine. This belongs to me, and nobody can claim it unless I decide to surrender it. Marcus felt moisture forming in his eyes. He grasped that sentiment, the frantic need to shield something irreplaceable from people who wanted to exploit it, dominate it, capitalize on it without caring about its significance or who it damaged. Why did he abandon it all? Marcus asked. In '93, why did he just disappear? Dorothy was silent for an extended beat. He got ill. Not the diabetes that ended his life later, but something different. Stress-related condition, his physician said. The warfare, the legal combat, the relentless strain, it was killing him. His children pleaded with him to withdraw, to concentrate on his spirituality and his healing. So he did. He departed Redstone, intending to return once he recovered. But circumstances grew messy. He relocated. He concentrated on his family. He started touring occasionally again. And somehow he never returned. Did he ever inform anyone else about the vault? I don't believe so, Dorothy said. He'd grown suspicious by then. And honestly, who could fault her? She'd been betrayed so many times by people she relied on, managers who embezzled from her, attorneys who served corporations instead of their client, acquaintances who leaked stories to gossip columns. By the time she departed Redstone, she didn't trust anyone with the complete picture, except perhaps God. She trusted you, Marcus observed. Dorothy chuckled quietly. I was insignificant, an assistant who brewed coffee and managed his calendar. Maybe that's why he felt comfortable confiding in me. I had nothing to gain from double-crossing him. They conversed for another hour. Dorothy shared anecdotes about Gerald's character, his faith, his profound devotion to his children. She described how methodical Gerald had been about safeguarding his heritage, how every piece in that vault had been selected deliberately and positioned there with intention. He wanted people to remember the music, Dorothy said. Not the controversies, not the legal warfare, not the industry manipulation, just the music and what it represented to people. That's why he preserved those instruments, those photographs, those masters. They were evidence that something magnificent had existed, even surrounded by all the corruption. When Marcus finally disconnected, he sat in the shadowy kitchen for an extended time, reflecting on Gerald Mitchell, about a man who'd climbed from obscurity to global recognition, only to realize that fame came with restrictions. About the battle to possess your own voice, your own narrative, your own value. Marcus understood that battle. He'd been waging it his entire existence. He thought about his own past, about the mother who'd abandoned them when he was 5, the father who'd worked himself into an early grave by 52. About growing up in rentals where the electricity got disconnected in winter and meals were whatever was most affordable at the discount market. About becoming a father at 24 with a woman who promised commitment and lasted 16 months before vanishing with another man and all of Marcus's savings. He thought about the years following, the exhaustion of solo parenting, the constant balancing of expenses and shifts and childcare, the shame of requesting assistance, of accepting handouts, of queuing at community pantries while other people stared past you like you were transparent. He'd survived by diminishing himself, by not demanding too much, not aspiring too high, not believing he warranted anything beyond basic subsistence. It was safer, that approach, simpler, less crushing when life predictably knocked you down again. But somewhere during that journey, he disappeared. The young man who'd loved blues and creativity and potential had morphed into someone who only understood endurance. And he'd been resigned to that, mostly, because what alternative existed? Until he'd entered that auction house and raised his hand. That singular act of bravery, of believing he might deserve something greater, had brought him here. To a farmhouse concealing mysteries, to a vault worth fortunes, to security personnel and litigation, and people who wanted to seize what he'd uncovered and declare it theirs. But it had also brought him to clarity, to witnessing his own struggle mirrored in Gerald Mitchell's battle, to recognizing that defending something irreplaceable wasn't merely about wealth or possession. It was about refusing to let the world diminish you. Marcus rose and walked through the hushed farmhouse to the northern wing. He opened the concealed entrance and descended into the vault, activating the lights that now brightened every section. He stood amid Gerald Mitchell's carefully maintained heritage and reached a conclusion. He wasn't going to let them prevail. Not Apex Music. Not the opportunistic musicians and engineers with their questionable allegations. Not the men in designer suits who assumed they could bully a single dad into capitulation. He was going to battle for this collection the same way Gerald had battled to assemble it, with everything he possessed. The next morning, Marcus convened an urgent meeting with Patricia and Vincent. They assembled in the farmhouse's dining area, the broad table scattered with legal briefs and valuation documents. "I want to go public," Marcus announced directly. "All of it. The vault, the collection, the lawsuits, everything. I want the world to know what I discovered and why it's significant." Patricia grimaced. "That could complicate the legal landscape, provide our adversaries more leverage." "It could also apply pressure on them," Vincent argued. "If the public learns about this collection, if they comprehend its cultural importance, it becomes far more difficult for labels and buyers to argue they have some entitlement to seize it. Public perception influences these situations. It's dangerous," Patricia cautioned. "Once this story explodes, and it will, you'll attract even more attention. More litigation, more intimidation, more chaos." "I understand," Marcus said, "but concealing hasn't shielded me. Maybe it's time to stop being invisible." They organized a press conference for the following week. Vincent helped Marcus compose a statement that highlighted the historical and cultural significance of the collection. Patricia prepared answers to anticipated legal inquiries. And Marcus rehearsed speaking steadily and assertively, attempting to summon a confidence he didn't quite possess, but desperately needed to display. News traveled rapidly once the press conference was announced. Media trucks began arriving in Redstone. Journalists knocked on doors throughout town, interviewing anyone who'd encountered Marcus or had thoughts about the farmhouse. The narrative was magnetic. Struggling single father uncovers secret vault worth millions. It contained every component of a storybook tale except the conclusion. Not everyone in town was encouraging. Some folks grumbled that Marcus had gotten fortunate when he didn't earn it. Others predicted he'd forfeit everything in legal warfare and wind up worse off than before. A handful suggested he should just auction the collection and vanish before someone got injured. But there were also surprising champions. Raymond from the diner appeared at the farmhouse with a crew of contractors offering to help strengthen the property's defenses without charge. Karen, the property agent who'd cautioned Marcus about the farmhouse, brought him a home-cooked meal and an apology. "I was mistaken about you," she said plainly. "You've got more spine than I realized." Even Eleanor from the pharmacy stopped by carrying a binder stuffed with articles about Gerald Mitchell. "I've been researching him," Eleanor said, "about how fiercely he battled to control his music. Seems to me like he'd want somebody like you safeguarding it. Somebody who understands what it's like to struggle for what's rightfully yours." The community backing expanded. A neighborhood church organized a benefit to assist with Marcus's legal costs. The truck stop where he worked displayed a banner, "We support Marcus Webb, Redstone's own." Lily's teacher initiated a classroom unit about music heritage, using the discovery as an educational opportunity about cultural conservation. Marcus felt something transform within him. He'd spent so long feeling isolated, feeling like he was confronting the world solo. But he wasn't isolated. He'd simply been too frightened to raise his head and recognize the people standing with him. The night before the press conference, Marcus couldn't rest. He lay awake contemplating what he would articulate, how he would carry himself, whether anyone would connect with the message he wanted to convey. Around midnight, he surrendered and went downstairs to the vault. He sat at Gerald's weathered workbench and opened one of the diaries he discovered there. The passages were irregular, covering years. Some were spiritual reflections, others were song concepts in development. A handful were simply musings, anxieties, aspirations written down in the dead of night when existence felt too burdensome to shoulder alone. One passage dated April 7, 1992 grabbed Marcus's focus. "I'm exhausted from battling," Gerald had written. "Exhausted from attorneys and agreements and people who view me as a profit source instead of a human. I just want to create music. I want to perform and compose and spread happiness. But the business has made that unattainable. They control fragments of me I can't reclaim. They dictate portions of my art I'll never retrieve. So I've chosen to preserve what I can, to construct this chamber where the elements that matter most remain protected, where nobody can claim them unless I decide to release them. Perhaps that makes me suspicious. Perhaps it makes me wise. Regardless, it grants me some authority over my own existence. Some independence in a world that's attempted to convert me into merchandise. This vault is mine. These masters are mine. This heritage is mine. And I'll defend it until my final breath. Marcus closed the diary with shaking hands. He grasped now, fully and deeply, why he had to fight. This wasn't about wealth. It wasn't even truly about the collection itself. It was about the conviction that some things are too precious to let others dictate. That your voice, your narrative, your dignity belongs to you and nobody else. He thought about Lily upstairs, sleeping soundly, dreaming about constellations and distant worlds. Marcus wanted his daughter to mature knowing that people could battle and triumph. That being overlooked wasn't equivalent to being helpless. That sometimes fate places extraordinary treasures in your direction, not to challenge your fortune, but to challenge your resolve. The press conference was conducted in the farmhouse's front yard at 10 in the morning. Over 50 journalists arrived, some from regional outlets, others from national broadcasters. Cameras crowded the gravel circle. Marcus stood at a podium Vincent had secured from the public library, his hands clutching the edges to prevent them from trembling. Patricia stood to his left, Vincent to his right. Diego and Yanel positioned themselves tactically around the assembly. And in the rear, barely noticeable, Mrs. Ramirez sat holding Lily's hand, flashing Marcus an encouraging nod. Marcus cleared his throat and started speaking. My name is Marcus Webb. 6 weeks ago, I acquired this farmhouse at a county auction for $75,000. I'm a single father. I work at a truck stop diner. I have an 8-year-old daughter and enough bills to understand exactly what hardship means. I purchased this farmhouse thinking I might be able to restore it, maybe lease it out, maybe construct something dependable for my family. What I discovered instead was a secret that had been concealed for over 30 years. He paused, scanning the journalists. They were hushed, focused, cameras recording. In a sealed vault beneath this farmhouse, I discovered a collection of artifacts belonging to Gerald Mitchell, master recordings, publishing ownership, instruments, accolades, personal belongings, a comprehensive archive of one of the most influential artists in blues history. Plus $150 million in gold bars. The collection has been valued at approximately $220 million total. Whispers spread through the assembly. Marcus pressed on. Since making this discovery, I've been sued 3 times by entities claiming they have entitlement to portions of this collection. I've been intimidated. I've been offered cash to liquidate and keep silent. I've been informed I'm out of my depth, that I should retreat, that I don't deserve what I discovered. And maybe they're correct about that final point. I don't know if anyone deserves to accidentally find this kind of discovery. But I do know that I uncovered it. And I understand what Gerald Mitchell intended when he built this vault. Marcus referenced Dorothy's accounts, the anecdotes the former assistant had relayed. Gerald Mitchell invested years battling to possess his own recordings. He confronted record corporations and producers and an industry that wanted to dominate his artistry. Every master he recovered, every stake he reclaimed, he secured in this vault. It was his declaration that his heritage belonged to him, not to businesses or buyers or people who recognized profit margins instead of soul. He wanted the music to resonate more than the revenue. He wanted people to honor what his work represented, not what it generated. Marcus's voice intensified. I'm not auctioning this collection to the wealthiest bidder. I'm not permitting it to vanish into some private investor's storage or get fragmented among record labels that already extracted too much. I'm founding an institute in Gerald Mitchell's name. The collection will be maintained, defended, and made available to the public through exhibitions and learning initiatives. The resources will sponsor music grants for aspiring artists who need backing to pursue their ambitions. Because that's what Gerald would have desired. That's what this discovery should represent, not wealth, heritage. The inquiries erupted rapidly after that. How would he administer the institute? What about the litigation? Was he equipped for the legal conflicts ahead? Did he have backing from Gerald's family? Marcus answered each one as truthfully as he could. Yes, he had the estate's approval. Yes, he was ready to battle in court. No, he didn't have all the solutions yet, but he had determination and he had mission and he wasn't surrendering. The press conference dominated national headlines that evening. Marcus's face broadcast on screens nationwide. Single father uncovers hidden fortune, chooses heritage over wealth. The narrative connected with people in ways he hadn't predicted. Contributions flooded into a crowdfunding platform someone had launched to assist with his legal costs. Musicians and artists voiced their endorsement. Gerald Mitchell's family issued a statement commending Marcus's choice and promising their cooperation with the Institute. But not everyone was pleased. That night, Marcus received a call from a blocked number. He nearly ignored it, but instinct made him answer. Mr. Webb, the voice was icy, businesslike, menacing. You made an error today, going public, painting a target on yourself. There are entities with substantial means who want what you discovered. They were willing to deal quietly. Now you've humiliated them, force their response. Consider this your last caution. Liquidate the collection or face repercussions beyond attorneys and litigation. Who is this? Marcus demanded. Someone who knows where your daughter attends school, what time she gets collected, who her classmates are. Lily's a precious kid. Would be tragic if something occurred because her father was too hard-headed to accept a generous offer. The line disconnected. Marcus stood motionless, the phone quaking in his grip. Then he moved rapidly. He called Diego and Yanel, informed them what had transpired. He called Patricia, who instantly contacted the FBI. He called Lily's school and arranged for his daughter to be retrieved by security and transported directly home. And then he called a security specialist and had every entrance, every window, every potential access point in the farmhouse fortified. He wasn't gambling anymore. Not with Lily's safety, not with their existence. The struggle had ceased being about wealth or heritage or ethics. It had transformed into survival. And Marcus Webb, who'd spent his entire life mastering how to endure impossible situations, was about to demonstrate to these people exactly how relentless a father could be when his child was endangered. They'd selected the wrong man to bully. They'd chosen the wrong battle, and they were about to discover that sometimes the person everyone dismisses turns out to be the one you should have respected all along. The FBI treated the threat gravely. Within 24 hours, Marcus's farmhouse had transformed into something resembling a federal safe house. Federal agents collaborated alongside Diego and Yanel, deploying surveillance technology advanced enough to detect a bird landing on the fence perimeter. Lily's school received security briefings. Mrs. Ramirez was educated on crisis protocols. Every individual who intersected Marcus's life was screened and recorded. Special Agent Chen directed the investigation. He was in his 40s, sharp-eyed and direct, with the kind of authority that made people volunteer information without prompting. "We're tracking the call," Agent Chen said, sitting opposite Marcus in the dining area. But whoever initiated it used advanced masking technology. Multiple servers, encryption layers, the complete setup. These aren't novices. What am I supposed to do? Marcus asked, fatigue making his voice break. I can't exist like this. Lily can't exist like this. You have alternatives, Agent Chen said deliberately. We can place you in protective supervision until we identify the threat. We can relocate you and your daughter, provide you new identities. Or you can resist. We supply security. You proceed with your plans for the Institute, and we utilize you as lure to draw these people into the visible. Marcus stared at the agent like he'd lost his sanity. You want to use my 8-year-old daughter as bait? No, Agent Chen said resolutely. We'd transfer Lily to a protected site with your neighbor or a relative. You'd remain here, visible, continuing to publicize the collection. They make a move, we apprehend them. Straightforward. Nothing about this is straightforward, Marcus said. But internally, he knew what he was going to decide. He'd already reached the conclusion the instant he'd stepped up to that press conference podium. He wasn't fleeing. Not anymore. Not ever again. The preparation consumed weeks. Lily went to stay with Marcus's brother in Montana, a man who lived on a ranch so isolated that cell reception was a myth, and strangers were spotted from miles away. Marcus despised every moment of being separated from his daughter. But he understood it was essential. Lily needed to be protected while Marcus completed what he'd initiated. Meanwhile, the institute took form. Patricia helped establish the legal structure, the Gerald Mitchell Heritage Institute, dedicated to preserving blues history and supporting emerging musicians. A board was formed, including representatives from Gerald's family, music scholars, and community leaders. Vincent agreed to serve as the director and historical advisor. The farmhouse itself would become the Institute's headquarters and main exhibition venue. But that required converting a deteriorating structure into a cutting-edge cultural facility. It demanded renovations, restorations, construction initiatives that would consume months and cost millions. Marcus immersed himself into the work with an intensity that approached fixation. He met with architects who specialized in heritage conservation. He consulted with exhibition designers about how to showcase the collection appropriately. He collaborated with audio engineers to build a performance venue where new artists could demonstrate their abilities. Every choice was made with one consideration in mind: what would respect Gerald's heritage while also generating something substantial for the future. The community mobilized in ways that still made Marcus's chest tighten with gratitude. Local builders provided reduced prices. Music students from the community college volunteered to assist with restoration efforts. The truck stop where Marcus had worked organized fundraising drives. Even some of the folks who'd initially ridiculed his purchase arrived with equipment and apologies, prepared to help construct something remarkable. But the threats didn't cease. They adapted. Someone spray-painted "Sell or Suffer" across the farmhouse's main gate. A rock shattered one of the newly installed windows with a message attached, "Final Warning." The FBI catalogued everything, assembling their case, anticipating whoever was orchestrating the intimidation to make an error substantial enough to reveal themselves. Marcus refused to be frightened into submission. If anything, each threat intensified his resolve. He launched a blog chronicling the Institute's development. He granted interviews to music journals and cultural programs. He became the public advocate of preservation, of defending heritage over commerce, of believing that some things transcended monetary value. 3 months after the press conference, the breakthrough arrived. One of the threatening emails was traced to a front company controlled by a private investment firm that specialized in obtaining music rights. Additional investigation disclosed that the firm's lead investor was a billionaire collector who'd been attempting to acquire Gerald Mitchell's masters for decades. He'd presented the estate outrageous sums, been rejected continuously, and had evidently concluded that coercion might succeed where bargaining had collapsed. The FBI arrested 6 individuals, including the 2 men who'd confronted Marcus in the parking lot. The collector himself faced accusations for conspiracy and intimidation. The story erupted across financial and entertainment media, a billionaire toppled by his fixation with possessing a fragment of music history he could never control. When Agent Chen called to inform Marcus of the development, Marcus actually broke down. Not from relief, though that was undeniably present, but from the staggering recognition that he'd prevailed. He'd confronted people with infinitely greater resources, more authority, more leverage, and he'd prevailed because he'd refused to surrender. "You can bring Lily home now," Agent Chen said kindly. "It's secure." Marcus collected his daughter the following day. The drive to Montana and back consumed 14 hours, but he didn't mind. When Lily sprinted into his arms at the ranch, Marcus held her so firmly that Lily wriggled and giggled and said, "Dad, you're squishing me." "I know," Marcus whispered into his daughter's hair. "I know." They drove back to Redstone together, Lily babbling about cattle and constellations and how her uncle had taught her to rope fence posts. The everyday delight of his daughter's voice, the pure satisfaction of having her nearby again, made Marcus recognize just how much he'd been holding tension for months. Now, finally, he could breathe. The farmhouse had metamorphosed during Lily's absence. The roof had been rebuilt, the windows upgraded, the walls reinforced and refinished. It still resembled the ranch-style masterpiece it had been designed to be, but now it was also structurally stable, climate-regulated, and equipped with technology that would make a military installation envious. The vault had been enlarged and properly climate-managed. The collection was being inventoried by a team of preservationists who handled each piece with the respect it warranted. The instruments were being prepared for exhibition. The master reels were being digitally archived to safeguard them for coming generations. And in what had once been the farmhouse's main gathering hall, construction teams were creating a performance venue, a place where young musicians could record, rehearse, present their work, where music instruction programs could be conducted, where the heritage of blues and Gerald Mitchell's impact could be taught to new generations who might never have heard Crossroads at Midnight or Delta Rain, but deserve to comprehend their cultural importance. Marcus walked through the construction with Lily's hand in his, indicating what each area would become. This will be the recording booth, and this section will be for classes. And over here, we're going to have audio stations where people can experience rare recordings and unreleased material. Lily gazed up at him with gleaming eyes. You built all this? A lot of people contributed, Marcus said. But yeah, sweetheart, we built this. The Institute's official inauguration was scheduled for June 20th, exactly 1 year after Marcus had bid on the farmhouse at that county auction. The date felt meaningful, a complete cycle that recognized how drastically things had shifted in 12 months. But before the public launch, there was a private gathering. Marcus had organized it himself, inviting only a select group of people who'd been instrumental to making the Institute a reality. Gerald Mitchell's family traveled in from different regions. Dorothy, the former assistant, came from Texas. Vincent and Patricia were there, naturally. Agent Chen attended in casual attire, a silent observer to justice delivered. And the community members who'd backed Marcus when support had been scarce filled the remaining chairs. Marcus stood in the newly restored entrance hall beneath the refurbished chandelier that now gleamed like it had been resurrected, and spoke from his core. A year ago, I was a single father barely covering bills. I worked 3 jobs. I was exhausted constantly. I'd forgotten what it felt like to aspire for anything beyond subsistence. Then I walked into an auction and purchased a farmhouse I couldn't afford, searching for a future I wasn't certain I merited. He paused, surveying the faces observing him. Some were already weeping. Marcus's own eyes stung with restrained tears. I found more than a farmhouse. I found a man's heritage concealed in darkness, awaiting someone courageous enough to defend it. Gerald Mitchell spent his existence battling to possess his own artistry. He confronted an industry that wanted to dominate him, to capitalize from his genius without respecting his dignity. And when he finally reclaimed fragments of what had been stolen, he secured them here. Not because he was suspicious, but because he grasped that some things are too irreplaceable to leave exposed. Marcus's voice intensified. This institute isn't about me. It's not even truly about Gerald, though it carries his name and celebrates his memory. It's about the conviction that art transcends business. That heritage warrants protection. That voices, especially voices that have been dismissed or manipulated, deserve to be amplified on their own conditions. We're building a venue where young musicians can study, compose, and control their work. Where music heritage is safeguarded and honored. Where the errors of the past don't have to recur in the future. He motioned to the vault entrance, now designated with a bronze marker that read, the Gerald Mitchell Archive. Safeguarding heritage, empowering tomorrow. Everything in that vault belongs to all of us now. Not to buyers or labels or people who view culture as merchandise. To everyone who ever felt moved by Delta Rain. To every kid who aspires to create music. To anyone who's ever been dismissed as not enough, not valuable, not worthy of authority over their own narrative. This is for all of us. The applause began tentatively, then swelled like a tide. Gerald's children stepped forward, embracing Marcus with tears rolling down their cheeks. Dad would have admired you, one of them murmured. He would have been incredibly proud. Dorothy approached next, her aged hands gripping Marcus's firmly. You accomplished what Gerald couldn't. You ensured his voice remains his. Thank you. The private gathering transitioned to a celebration in the front yard. Music filled the air, fittingly, a playlist of Gerald Mitchell's signature tracks mixed with contemporary blues artists he'd influenced. People swayed. They laughed. They shared memories about what Gerald's music had represented to them, how it had provided the soundtrack to their lives, their relationships, their moments of pure elation. Lily danced with Vincent, her small feet perched on his shoes as he twirled her around the yard. Marcus observed from the periphery, his chest so overwhelmed it ached. This was what he'd been defending. Not the wealth, not even the heritage precisely, but this community, connection, happiness constructed on foundations of bravery and integrity. Patricia appeared beside him, glass in hand. You realize you're wealthy now, right? Once we complete licensing some of those recordings, once the programs and exhibitions begin producing income, you're going to have more resources than you can imagine. Marcus shook his head. It funds the Institute, scholarships and initiatives and conservation. That's what we established. You'll still draw a salary, Patricia said resolutely. A substantial one. You've earned it. You can't support anyone if you're still grinding yourself into the ground at the truck stop. Marcus hadn't considered that far forward. The concept of financial stability, genuine stability, felt alien and somewhat intimidating. What would I even do if I wasn't juggling 3 jobs? Whatever you desire, Patricia said with a grin. That's the essence of freedom, Marcus. You get to decide. The public inauguration 3 days later attracted crowds from nationwide. News vehicles lined the road. Blues enthusiasts, scholars, and intrigued visitors occupied every available space in Redstone. The tiny desert town had never witnessed anything comparable. Marcus delivered a brief address at the ribbon cutting, shorter and more straightforward than the private gathering. He acknowledged the community, recognized Gerald's family, and welcomed everyone to discover the heritage they'd fought so intensely to protect. The inaugural exhibition, titled Midnight Blues, Gerald Mitchell's Battle for His Legacy, chronicled the musician's journey, his confrontations with record companies, and the creation of the secret vault. Visitors progressed through chronologically, viewing photographs, examining contracts, grasping the circumstances of what had been concealed and why. The instruments were showcased in climate-regulated enclosures, each one illuminated like the masterpiece it represented. The vintage Martin guitar glowed under focused lights. The Hammond organ gleamed. Visitors stood in respectful stillness, absorbing the craftsmanship, the history, the sheer magnitude of these instruments that had once filled concert halls and moved audiences to tears. The audio stations were the most sought-after attraction. People donned headphones and experienced unreleased sessions, alternative versions, studio experiments that exposed the creative evolution behind legendary songs. Some visitors wept, others swayed rhythmically, unable to restrain the music. One elderly man told Marcus he'd witnessed Gerald perform in 1981, and hearing these tracks felt like journeying back to his younger days. The performance venue was already reserved for months. Local students would be the first to utilize the recording booth, followed by emerging musicians selected through the Institute's new fellowship program. Music instruction workshops were planned every weekend. The farmhouse that had once been vacant and neglected now vibrated with artistic vitality. Redstone itself had metamorphosed. The attention surrounding the Institute attracted visitors, which attracted commerce. The truck stop where Marcus used to work now had crowds waiting. Motels launched. Businesses that had been abandoned for years reopened. The town that had been withering, steadily losing population and identity, suddenly had significance again. People labeled it the Redstone Revival. Marcus called it evidence that one choice, one instant of bravery could radiate outward in ways you'd never anticipate. 6 months after the inauguration, Marcus stood in the vault alone. He did this occasionally late at night when the farmhouse was still and the visitors had departed. He traversed through the archive, running his fingers across the exhibits, recalling what it had felt like to uncover all this in the shadows with just a flashlight and a racing pulse. Tonight, he paused before a photograph he'd viewed countless times but never grew weary of examining. Gerald Mitchell on stage, 1982, mid-performance, his head tilted back, harmonica at his lips, one arm raised like he was reaching for the entire crowd. Pure passion captured in a single image. Pure authenticity in a man who'd struggled to claim that authenticity. "I hope I honored you right," Marcus whispered to the photograph. "I hope this is what you envisioned." He didn't anticipate a response, but standing there in the stillness, encircled by heritage and rhythm and the evidence that some things endure against all obstacles, Marcus felt a tranquility he'd never known before. He'd spent his entire existence feeling insignificant, feeling overlooked, feeling like he didn't contribute in any substantial way. But he'd contributed. He'd taken something irreplaceable that could have been destroyed or stolen, and he defended it. He'd constructed something that would outlast him, that would impact lives he'd never encounter, that would safeguard beauty and authenticity for generations ahead. He'd contributed, and that transformed everything. Upstairs, Lily was sleeping in the bedroom they now called home. The farmhouse wasn't merely an institute headquarters anymore. It was their residence, their refuge, the place where they'd create memories and celebrate milestones and experience the kind of steady, secure existence Marcus had only imagined during those years of hardship. Lily's room overlooked the desert, and Marcus had equipped it with telescopes and celestial maps and volumes about space exploration. His daughter wanted to be an astrophysicist now, wanted to explore the cosmos and identify new worlds. And Marcus, who could finally afford to aspire on behalf of his child, was already investigating the premier science programs, the premier universities, the premier possibilities. Nothing was unattainable anymore. That was the blessing this discovery had granted them. Not the resources, though that undoubtedly mattered, but the understanding that extraordinary things occurred. That bravery was validated. That sometimes, against all reason and odds, the universe observed a struggling single father and declared, "Here, you deserve this. You've earned this. Claim it and construct something magnificent." The inaugural fellowship recipients were revealed in September. 20 young musicians from marginalized communities, each receiving complete funding for music instruction, equipment expenses, and guidance from industry veterans. They traveled to Redstone for a week-long immersive program studying music heritage, enterprise, artistry, and autonomy. Marcus addressed them on their opening day. He shared his story, not to boast, but to demonstrate a principle. "I'm not exceptional," he said to the group of teenagers gazing up at him. "I'm not remarkably gifted or uniquely credentialed. I was simply someone who refused to surrender when circumstances got difficult, who selected bravery over ease, who believed that defending something significant was worth the struggle." He paused, examining each young face. "You're all here because you possess ability, but ability isn't sufficient. The music industry, the creative realm, it's going to attempt to exploit you. It's going to present you contracts that appear incredible but conceal manipulation. It's going to attempt to claim your voice, your narrative, your dignity. Don't permit it. Battle for ownership. Battle for authority. Battle to ensure that when you produce something remarkable, you determine what becomes of it." That's Gerald Mitchell's heritage. That's what this institute is genuinely about, teaching you to safeguard your own brilliance. One of the students, a 17-year-old guitarist from Detroit named Isaiah, raised his hand. "How do you recognize when to battle and when to retreat?" Marcus smiled. "You battle when surrendering would sacrifice a fragment of yourself you can't survive without. You battle when the alternative is permitting someone else to define your value. You battle when it's not merely about you anymore, when it's about conviction or heritage or defending something larger than your own comfort. And you retreat when the struggle costs more than it's worth, when it's devastating your well-being or your family or your spirit. Recognizing the distinction, that's the challenging aspect. But trust yourself. Your instinct understands." The students participated in sessions, recorded preliminary tracks, performed for one another. On the closing night of the program, they held a presentation in the farmhouse's performance venue. Marcus sat in the front row with Lily, observing these young musicians channel their passion into original compositions, interpretations of standards, experimental pieces that transcended classification. Isaiah performed last. He'd composed a song during the week titled "Keep Your Soul," inspired by everything he'd discovered about Gerald Mitchell's struggles and Marcus's battle to defend the heritage. The lyrics were honest and stirring, addressing the experience of being young, gifted, and constantly pressured to compromise. When he concluded, the venue exploded in applause. But Marcus noticed Isaiah's eyes were glistening with emotion. After the presentation, Marcus approached him. "That was extraordinary," Marcus said. "You have genuine talent." Isaiah wiped his eyes. "I almost didn't attend this week. My dad said we couldn't manage it, even with the fellowship covering everything. He said I should find a steady job, abandon dreaming about music. But my instructor insisted, help me complete the application." He gazed at Marcus with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "This week transformed my existence. I comprehend now that my voice matters, that I don't have to surrender it simply because someone presents me an opportunity. Thank you for demonstrating that." Marcus embraced him firmly. "You're going to accomplish extraordinary things. Just remember what you absorbed here. Protect your creations. Control your narrative. And never permit anyone to persuade you that survival equals fulfillment." That exchange remained with Marcus for months. It reminded him why the Institute mattered, why the struggle had been justified. He wasn't merely preserving Joel Mitchell's heritage. He was equipping young artists with the tools to defend their own. The students returned home, but many maintained contact. They sent Marcus recordings of songs they'd composed, requested guidance about agreements, shared their triumphs and challenges. The Institute became more than an archive or an instruction program. It became a brotherhood, a network of artists supporting one another, absorbing wisdom from history, and constructing a superior tomorrow. By the Institute's second anniversary, the influence was quantifiable and substantial. Over 200 musicians had received fellowships or funding. The museum welcomed over 50,000 visitors annually. The archive had become an indispensable resource for music scholars studying blues, jazz, and the evolution of American roots music. Universities were developing courses based on the Institute's educational materials. And Marcus, well, Marcus had transformed, too. He'd returned to school, studying arts administration and non-profit leadership. He was skilled at it, uncovering abilities he never knew he possessed. He spoke at symposiums about cultural preservation. He consulted with other estates about how to safeguard artistic heritage. He'd written a memoir about his journey, with all proceeds funding the Institute. The book, titled The Hidden Vault, How One Father's Courage Preserved a Legend's Legacy, became a bestseller. Marcus conducted interviews on national television, appeared on programs, spoke at colleges. People resonated with his narrative because it wasn't about fortune or advantage. It was about an ordinary person making an extraordinary decision and refusing to retreat when circumstances became difficult. But beyond any external achievement, Marcus had become a man who moved through existence with confidence, who recognized his value, who'd confronted billionaires and prevailed, who'd taken impossible situations and converted them into something remarkable. One evening, 3 years after acquiring the farmhouse, Marcus and Lily sat on the newly restored deck, observing the sunset illuminate the desert in shades of crimson and violet. Lily was 11 now, all gangly energy and ambitious aspirations, still fascinated with space, but also developing curiosity in sound engineering. She'd spent the afternoon in the Institute studio learning about recording techniques from one of the instructors. "Dad," Lily said, resting against Marcus's shoulder. "Yeah, sweetheart. Do you ever wish you'd just sold everything? Like just grabbed the money and relocated somewhere simpler?" Marcus was silent for a beat, contemplating. "You know what? There were moments, especially during the frightening phases, when I considered it. When it would have been easier to quit. But no, I don't wish that. Because this," he motioned to the farmhouse, the Institute, the existence they'd constructed, "this matters. We're part of something greater than ourselves now. We helped safeguard brilliance. We helped other people pursue their aspirations. That's worth more than easy." Lily nodded, absorbing it. "I'm glad you bought the cursed farmhouse." Marcus chuckled. "It was never really cursed, just concealing mysteries." "Aren't those the same thing?" Lily asked with the kind of insight that sometimes astonished Marcus. Hauntings are just histories that haven't been revealed yet. Marcus pulled his daughter close, inhaling the desert breeze and the scent of Lily's conditioner and the particular aroma of home. "Then I guess we're mystery solvers," he said. "We discovered the histories and liberated them." The Gerald Mitchell Heritage Institute continued to flourish. New exhibitions rotated through the museum. The performance venue hosted concerts that were live-streamed globally. The fellowship program expanded to include international students. Plans were being formulated for regional centers in other cities, extending the mission beyond Redstone. The institute partnered with recording facilities to establish apprenticeship programs. They created a publishing division to help young artists maintain control of their creations. They launched a digital platform where musicians could study contracts, royalties, and protecting their intellectual property. Every initiative was designed with one objective: preventing the next generation from experiencing what Gerald Mitchell had suffered. Marcus also collaborated with Gerald's family to produce a documentary about the musician's life, focusing on his battle for ownership and the creation of the secret vault. The film premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was later purchased by a major streaming service. Millions of viewers watched it, discovering not just about Gerald Mitchell's music, but about his courage and resolve. The documentary featured interviews with Dorothy, who shared anecdotes about Gerald's final period before departing Redstone. It included archival footage of Gerald in the recording booth, negotiating with executives, performing for devoted audiences. And it concluded with footage of Marcus in the vault, explaining how discovering this collection had transformed his understanding of what heritage meant. "Heritage isn't what you abandon," Marcus said in the documentary's closing sequence. "It's what you enable others to construct." Gerald didn't just leave us music. He left us a teaching about controlling your own artistry, defending your creations, and never permitting the world to diminish you. That teaching is more precious than any master recording or gold bar. That's the genuine treasure in this vault. But the core of it all remained in that desert farmhouse where a frightened, desperate single father had gambled on something impossible. Where a secret had lingered in the shadows for someone courageous enough to uncover it. Where heritage and bravery had intersected and generated something that would outlast them all. Marcus stood in the vault one final time before the third anniversary celebration, gazing at the bronze marker he'd had mounted above Gerald's workbench. He worked hard for the legacy, and he owns it still, in honor of Gerald Mitchell, who taught us that our voices belong to us. He reflected on the journey that had delivered him here. From hardship to purpose, from overlooked to impactful, from enduring to flourishing. It hadn't been fortune, despite what some people asserted. It had been decision. The decision to raise his hand at an auction. The decision to open a hidden entrance. The decision to battle when battling was terrifying. The decision to defend heritage over wealth. Anyone could make those decisions, he'd discovered. Anyone could conclude that bravery mattered more than ease. That some things were worth safeguarding even when safeguarding was difficult. That your value wasn't dictated by situations, but by decisions. Marcus Webb had chosen to be courageous. And that singular choice had transformed everything. As he ascended the stairs out of the vault and secured the door behind him, he contemplated all the young musicians who'd traversed this space. All the individuals who'd been inspired by Gerald's narrative and Marcus's determination. All the voices that would be defended because someone had concluded heritage mattered. The celebration that evening was spectacular. Blues icons performed tributes to Gerald Mitchell. Fellowship recipients demonstrated their abilities. The governor of Nevada delivered a speech about the significance of cultural preservation. And Marcus, wearing a suit that cost more than his first truck but felt appropriate for the moment, stood with Lily beside him and felt genuinely, completely content. Isaiah, the young guitarist from Detroit, was there as an honored guest. He'd just secured his first recording contract, one that he'd negotiated himself with guidance from the Institute's legal advisors. He owned his masters. He controlled his publishing. He'd ensured the contract protected his voice. "I learned from the greatest," Isaiah told Marcus during the reception, motioning around the farmhouse. "You and Mr. Gerald showed me how to stand firm. Now I'm instructing other kids in my community." We're forming our own cooperative, ensuring we all comprehend our rights before we sign anything. The Institute's approach is expanding. Marcus felt emotion welling in his eyes. That's precisely what this was intended to be. Not just conserving the past, but defending the future. This was what second opportunities resembled. This was what bravery constructed. This was what transpired when you refused to remain insignificant, refused to remain frightened, refused to permit the world to inform you that aspirations were for other people. Marcus Webb had been a struggling single father working 3 jobs just to survive. Now he was the founder and director of one of the most significant music institutes in the nation. He was an advocate for preservation and ownership and protecting artistic heritage. He was evidence that transformation was achievable if you were willing to battle for it. But beyond any designation or accomplishment, he was a father who could finally provide his daughter the stability and opportunity she merited. He was a man who'd confronted his fears and triumphed. He was living evidence that sometimes the universe places impossible challenges in your direction, not to shatter you, but to reveal how resilient you've always been. Later that night, after the attendees had departed and the farmhouse had grown still, Marcus walked through the vacant rooms one final time. Lily had fallen asleep on one of the sofas, exhausted from dancing and exhilaration. Marcus covered her with a throw and stood observing his daughter sleep, this remarkable girl who'd been his motivation for everything. He thought about the day at the auction, sitting in his old Ford with clammy palms and a pounding heart, deliberating whether to raise his hand. He thought about the anxiety that had nearly paralyzed him. The rational voice that had insisted it was too hazardous, too costly, too impossible. But he'd raised his hand regardless, and that one instant of bravery had led to this. A farmhouse converted into a cultural hub. An institute transforming lives. A community reinvigorated. A heritage defended. All because he'd refused to permit fear to triumph. Marcus walked to the windows overlooking the desert. The sky was saturated with stars, the same stars Lily adored studying. He thought about how Gerald Mitchell must have stood at these same windows, gazing out at this same sky, making his own decisions about courage and heritage. We accomplished it, Marcus whispered to the stars, to Gerald's memory, to the universe that had positioned this impossible gift in his path. We defended what mattered. We constructed something magnificent. We demonstrated to them that some things are worth more than wealth. Anyone can discover treasure if they're courageous enough to open the doors everyone else is too frightened to approach. Anyone can defend heritage if they prioritize conviction over wealth. Anyone can transform their existence if they select bravery over ease. Just once, just one instance. That's all it requires to transform everything. As the evening concluded and people departed and the farmhouse glowed with illumination and vitality and purpose, Marcus Webb gazed up at the stars beginning to emerge in the deepening sky. He thought about Gerald Mitchell somewhere beyond those stars, and silently vowed that the heritage would be defended, the voices would be amplified, and the struggle would persist. Because for Marcus and for everyone he'd inspired, this wasn't the conclusion of the narrative. It was only the beginning. The man who once couldn't afford utilities now administered a $220 million heritage. The father who'd worked 3 jobs now employed dozens of individuals. The overlooked man now inspired millions. And it all commenced with $75,000 and the bravery to believe he deserved more than subsistence. Marcus lifted Lily gently, carrying his sleeping daughter upstairs to bed. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same vow he'd made years ago in a cramped apartment when everything felt impossible. "We're going to be all right, sweetheart. Better than all right." This time, it wasn't optimism. It was reality. The end. Up next, 2 more compelling stories that will inspire you. Click now to keep discovering what happens when courage meets destiny.